Hello, I'm Kevin Carr and I'm the CEO of Florida Makes, and I'm here today to talk to you about the state of Florida manufacturing. I'm coming to you today from the factory floor of Altrua Global Solutions, a 44-person printing and manufacturing company in Tallahassee, Florida. Altrua specializes in point-of-service display systems from concept to the actual production. This is an example of one of their products. As you can imagine, it goes on a very large cup of coffee, but these are the types of displays that you would see in a retail company or in a fast food such as a McDonald's or a Burger King. So what I'm going to talk to you about today is the state of manufacturing, where we find ourselves now here in October 2020 after the crisis. But before I do that, I want to refresh everyone's memory about what our goal was. Florida Makes has the privilege on behalf of the foundation of being the goal leader for helping Florida achieve a top five state for manufacturing jobs by 2030. And as you can see from this chart, that's our principal goal. However, there are a lot of other goals that I check here on this chart that support that or contribute to that, or vice versa. So before I get started, I'll remind you of a slide that I used last year when we took a look at 2018 and where we were. At the time, Florida manufacturing employment was at 372,266 jobs. We ranked 12th among the top 12 states. So if we want to think about moving forward and getting to number 5, we got to figure out who are those 11 competitors that we're dealing with that are ahead of us in that ranking. At the time last year, I said that if we were to get to a number 5 status and be that number 5, achieve that by 2030, we would have to add an additional 214,000 jobs. Take a look ahead now, and we're looking at the same set of states. 2019, we ended the year with 384,000 manufacturing jobs, which was a net gain of 11,941 jobs. So we're making progress, and that number 214,000 is now shrunk to 202,000. And you can see where we're at in comparison to a lot of the other states that we're competing with here. And you'll notice that a number of them basically stood still. I mean, again, you still have California, you still have Texas as our biggest threats out there. There are places like Wisconsin that are showing some good progress, but no one achieved a job growth year over year from 2018 to 2019 as well as Florida. And you can see we ended the year, as I said, with 384,000 jobs. Looking at that from a different perspective, if we were to go back and look at it from 2014 forward, while it's sometimes sad to look at the fact that we're in 12th place, you have to really look at our growth over the past 6 years. So from during that period, 14 to 2019, 5 years, you can see that Florida's job production and manufacturing outpaced every other state, in particular California and Texas. So we are by far ahead of most other manufacturing states, and particularly those that are 12 ahead of us in terms of employment growth. So over the next 10 years, if we could keep a rate like this, I think it's very possible, very achievable to get to that 2030 goal. Keeping in mind that as we grow, a lot of these other states, as you can see in the case of New York over the past year, have shrunk. So let's look at our progress from a different perspective. And again, I remind you what my 2018 slide was for GDP. Back in 2018, Florida ended the year with about 55 billion in gross domestic product output from manufacturing. And you can see, again, this is in comparison with those other 11 states that are in the top of the pack for employment. So yes, we're down at the bottom of the pack, but again, when you start to look at it year over year, we're one of the few states that actually grew during that year. And you can see, as I indicate here with the red numbers, most of the states in the top 12 states shrunk. Yes, California, yes, Texas, they grew. Wisconsin looked pretty good. But again, in terms of percentage of GDP growth, Florida led the nation. From, a 6-year perspective, a 5-year perspective, from 2014 to 2019, our growth rate basically blows away the rest of the pack. So again, can we get there by 2030? Can we be in the top 5? I would argue yes, we can if we stay on the same path that we've been on basically since 2014 through 2019. Now, those of you who know me know that one of my big obsessions is where do we sit in terms of productivity? Productivity is, to me, is one of the most important measures of manufacturing competitiveness. And there, again, we're behind the pack when we compare ourselves to the rest of the top 12, manufacturing employment states. But as you can see again in the red numbers, a lot of these states over the past year slipped. California maintained its position. Texas maintains its position in terms of productivity rank. Indiana did very well. And Florida, again, did very well. And from a productivity standpoint, and we ended last year, we were at about 150,000 per employee of output in manufacturing. This year, we increased to 153. So not just holding steady at our point of 30, but we're actually growing in terms of our productivity growth. And U.S. average, just a note, actually went down by 1,000. So U.S. productivity went down. A lot of these top 12 states went down, but Florida rose up. And again, last year I mentioned that we were leaving about $12.4 billion on the table if we could increase our productivity to the national average. As we increased our productivity, just $3,000 per employee, you can see that we actually had a net gain in 2019 of an additional $1.1 billion to the Florida economy just from the productivity increase of the same employment base. Taking a look at that last 5-year ranking of how we did in terms of growth rate, and I show these because these are my most feel-good slides. You know, when we're back in 30th or we're back in 12th place, you know, that can make you feel a little worrisome, if you will, with respect to the prowess of Florida manufacturing. But when you begin to see how we've progressed so much over the past 5-6 years, you can see in terms of productivity growth rate, we have grown at 20% from where we were in 2014 as compared to the rest of these states. And again, California will always be our big competitor. Texas will always be a big competitor. But if we continue to grow at this rate, we can in fact achieve that goal by 2030 of being a top 5 manufacturing state. Fast forward now, it's not the end of 2019 anymore. Now it's October 2020. We just went through a COVID crisis. What did that do to all these great numbers? So a report that just recently came out of August in 2020's statistical data, which was produced by Adrian Johnson over at DEO, tells us that where we're at in 2019 at the end of the year was we had an average annual wage of about $63,800 for manufacturing jobs, which is kind of the third in the ranking of industry wage rates. And we had an employment base, which I mentioned earlier, of about 384, almost and a half thousand Floridians. By August 2020, as a result of the COVID crisis, that number of 384 slipped back to 373,300 jobs, a decrease of 11,500 jobs over the year. And it was the first time we had any job loss like that in years, actually since the Hurricane Irma crisis. At the end of the year, manufacturing had 20,720 establishments throughout the state. So our job loss that we experienced by August, that was the 5th consecutive month for the manufacturing industry that we lost jobs due to COVID. Now, 11,500, by comparison to other sectors, tourism, retail, restaurants, is minimal. And what we've seen is a pretty steady recovery back towards that employment base where we were at the end of 2019. So that's the challenge where we're at. Manufacturers, for the most part, most of them, 90% of them at least, were able to stay open, were able to produce, in some case, increase their production throughout the crisis, as in the case here with Altrua, where they've been able to pivot and provide critical materials and supplies that were in shortage during the crisis. So we're seeing them come back, and I expect over the next couple of months we'll see manufacturing fully recover, if not surpass the numbers where we're at. So it's a bit of a loss. What does that mean? What happened during that? I had the opportunity to participate in a industry-led initiative that focused on restoring the economic strength through employment and tourism. And this was some 69 associations from across the state that came together to think about ways to move forward, strategies, policies, regulations that could help us recover as a state. And there were some 6, 7, 8, 9 groups, all focused in different areas, from retail to liability to restaurants to trade and logistics. And the group that I had the honor of leading was really focused on manufacturing supply chain and what are the things that we experienced during that crisis. So I just wanted to give you a sense of what some of those impacts were. Some of the things that we realized, as I talked about, manufacturing fared pretty well as compared to other industries, but we did learn very easily, very quickly, just like the nation did, that our manufacturing economy is weak and very highly dependent on importing highly valued goods from other states, or as a country perspective, from other countries. Manufacturers, however, it was very quickly observed, as is the case with a company like Altrua here, proved to be a stabilizing element of our economy throughout the crisis. Most manufacturing workers remained employed. As I said, there was a net loss of 11,500 or so. And further, manufacturers proved to be highly resilient and agile to be able to pivot, to be able to provide those other supplies that were in short demand, whether it was PPE, whether it was parts for ventilators, whether it was hand sanitizers. Throughout the state, you saw companies not typically in those lines of businesses pivot to produce those products. Another big issue that we dealt with throughout the crisis, and I know I worked with some of the folks at the chamber on this, was we were dealing with variation in local ordinances. Manufacturing was classified as an essential business by the CDC, by our governor, but a lot of that didn't trickle down to the local governments until later. So there was a difference in terms of who could stay open and who couldn't, what were the safety protocols. And manufacturing is particularly challenged with variations like that, not just within the state, but also across state lines, because production is in many cases an orchestration of many companies coming together to produce a product, not necessarily residing in the same geography. The other thing that was brought up, and I've heard many times at summits of transportation and logistics summits of the Chamber Foundation, was, people wanted to highlight, people that participated in this committee wanted to highlight the fact that our most expensive export remains empty containers. So regardless of the fact that we seem to fare well and went through that, the fact that we are such an import-dependent state, whether that's from international markets or other states, seemed to be a very big issue with how resilient we are ultimately. And finally, one of the things that we talked about was that Florida's government has an outdated and overall lack of appreciation for the essential role of the manufacturing sector. Now, I say that not necessarily to pick on anyone, but a lot of our point of view is often clouded by the success that we've had as a tourism-based state, where manufacturing is really an essential part of our economy, can help to diversify our economy, and really help us to be more resilient in times like a crisis or in times like a hurricane. Some of the recommendations that came out of that committee, and there's 5, and I'll summarize them here. A key one is to establish a manufacturing supply chain caucus in the Florida legislature. And I can tell you that there's a senator right now and a number of representatives coming together to do just that, to begin that conversation, to create a policy framework, if you will, for discussing manufacturing and supply chain issues in the state. We wanted to continue to see an investment in training and job programs. We have a lot of really good ones. We need to redouble those efforts. There was a recommendation put forth out of this committee, but also put forth out of Tax Watch to establish a Florida Supplier Tax Credit Initiative that would be focused on giving companies a tax credit type of incentive, if you will, for purchasing locally. Finally, we need to think about and focus on how can we strengthen the resilience of Florida's manufacturing sector through advancements in research, technology, and education. And finally, take a look once again at the economic development efforts that are in place at places like Enterprise Florida, our economic development corporations and centers throughout the state that really focus on the development, retention, and expansion of Florida's 21st century manufacturing economy. With that, I'll thank you for your time and look forward to any questions that maybe would be sent my way. Thank you very much.